Hi everyone, and welcome back to another watercolor tutorial. Today we're going to be doing, I'm probably going to simplify this a little bit, but we're going to do this little succulent tutorial. And like I said, I'll probably do a little more simple, probably not as many extensions, just to kind of keep it short, but it'll walk you through the steps. I decided I'm going to do a little series, a succulent series. So I've got one that I'm doing here today. I've got one that we'll do tomorrow that'll be a little more dimensional. And then the next one will have like more detail in it yet. I filmed that one first. And so the class on that one's going to be about an hour. So, but I thought it might be good to do a little progression for a succulent class. So they're usually a lot of fun to do. So as you can see, I've got my little pot sketched in here, and that's really about the only thing I need to worry about. Like I said, I'm going to simplify this a little bit. So I'm going to start off here with my sap green. And you can see I've got it nice and light. I just want to kind of put a staining layer in. So when I put this in, I want to give me a little space here so it looks like the cactus is sitting inside, you know, the that rim of the pot. So I kind of plan for that here. And I'm just going to kind of do kind of a basic bulbous shape. And then we'll bring one over here, kind of coming off around. Let me go a little darker so make sure that you can see that. Okay, and I'll do a couple here. Do that one a little bigger, and then we'll do a little one here. So you could always come back and do this one again and make it a little more complicated, but for the sake of time, I'm going to keep this one a little shorter. So I've got that part in, and while that's wet, I can go ahead and bring some that's a little bit darker in there. So here's where I'll use my Viridian green. And I'll pick up a little bit of my burnt sienna. Okay. And you can see how that changes that color. It earths it up and makes it a much warmer green. Okay, so here on this side, we'll start here. I just want to, while this is wet, I'm going to put a little bit of some darker in some areas where this kind of gives it a little bit of contour. And so as I place that color in now, you can see this one where it was wetter, it's already kind of diffused out. Now I just come in with a little damp, you know, not wet, just slightly damp brush. No color on it. And I'm just going to soften those edges there. And you want to get to these before they have, you know, they start kind of settling in and drying. And a little bit that way. And I would say I could probably come and hit those a little bit again. So go ahead and bring some of that in again. So this one, I don't really probably have to do too much to that, but this one here, I want to diffuse that out and soften it. There you go. All right, so I'm going to give that a minute to dry. I'll wait to do the soil part just because that part is wet. So I'll go ahead and put in for the pot, and I'll use a little bit of my phthalo blue here. So you can see that's a much drier very more inky. But you know, those are, once I get my color mix, then I can control, you know, that wetness of how fluid do I want it, especially on this layer where I want it to be kind of more of that staining layer. You know, I want to keep that nice and soft, a little more wet. So here I've got a nice wet mixture. So if I'm going to say, like, here's my shadow side, so I'm usually going to start in that spot that's always going to be my darkest, because that's where, you know, I've just mixed that color up, and that color is more concentrated on my brush right now. So once I get that color out, I've put my sketch in with a watercolor pencil. And so if I just kind of go over that a little bit, I can just let it blend right into my my color there. Get that little edge there. Come around here. I used more of a brown pencil on this, so I'm just going to have to go over that a little bit more. Usually if I try to do a color that's a little more similar, you know, it's going to be a little less noticeable. So kind of where I've got a little bit of highlight working here, I think I'm going to lift out just a little bit here too. Keep that a little lighter there. And so again, now that I've got that in while it's wet, maybe bring a little brighter blue in there. And just kind of come back over it, and I can kind of enhance that color. So you can see where I'm using that side of the brush a little bit more, that it's giving me a little more texture where that stroke is ending. I'm just putting that on down the side. And let me strengthen up this rim here a little bit. Here I can pick up a little bit of that brown. I think this is still pretty, now wait, because that's still pretty damp. If I put a little definition in there, it's not really going to be very effective. All right. So I'm going to come back again to the cactus part. I'm going to go a little bit, another layer of kind of this medium green, a bit of the Viridian, a little bit of the burnt sienna. Here's where I can kind of put that color in. Okay, so I've pulled that out, and then now again with just water on my brush, I can go ahead and bring a little texture into, let's bring a little bit of some browns in there. Just soften that out a little bit. Okay, so on this, you can see where I kind of ended up bridging across there. I'll bring a little definition here, and I think I'll just make this part a little wider. I'm just going to soften that out again. Getting a little too sloppy. Okay, so right now what I see, I've got kind of warmer tones going here, but this edge here just looks a little out of place because it's a much cooler green. So that's where I want to bring a little stronger, warmer green right over that and just hone that back so it's not quite so cool there. And because that edge there is still all wet, that looks like it's going to just diffuse right out on its own. I can go ahead and lay in the kind of basis for the flowers. I'm going to start off with a little bit of the cadmium yellow. Let's put that right there. This doesn't need to be very soupy. I can use there's not a lot of movement in there, so I can use that a little bit drier. So let's lay down a little foundation of some of the yellows, and those will kind of pop through when we layer in some of the other colors over top of it. So kind of put that concentration where those yellow colors are. See, I've got a little bit of gap or a little bit of space where those are going to be. I can also take a little bit of this yellow here and kind of tap a little bit in here, and see how that kind of brightens it up. It kind of brings a little warmth into this part of the, I think just kind of makes the colors a little more, it's a very soft vibrancy that it adds. So since I'm not super wet there, I can go ahead and put my little soil area in. I'll use a little bit of my raw umber, or this, I'm sorry, this is burnt umber. Burnt umber is typically a little more red. So when the color is deemed as being a burnt color, it's usually going to have a reddish tone to it. Okay, I'm going to leave a little bit of white space there just for a little texture. Okay, and then I'm going to use, you can see how I almost have this where it's kind of grayed out a little bit. I'll just kind of use a little bit of some of the burnt sienna because I've brought that in the green. You see that difference between those. So if I kind of make just a little soft table area, and bring a little bit down and through here. It doesn't have to go everywhere. Sometimes, you know, when you can show a little bit of restraint and not filling everything in, it brings more of an artistic quality to your painting. Just like a little tip there. And I'm going to use some of this kind of gray color here, which is my phthalo blue with the burnt umber. So if I'm more on the brown side, it'll be a little more gray. Okay, I'm just going to pop a little bit, kind of a little there underneath the pot. And I can also bring a little bit here underneath that rim. And if I want to put just a little, again, I'll want to feather it out, but if I want to bring a little darker here, a little more grade, just along that edge, do a little bit here. All right, now I'm going to finish up the flowers. So for this, I will bring some of my magenta over, and I'll bring a little bit of that. Kind of going for a salmon pink color. And so here I can just tap in kind of in between some of those. And just kind of creating like that little bowl shape. Okay. All right. I'll let those dry and I'll come back over them one more time to strengthen those up. And so now I can kind of start on the little prickly parts. And this is where you want to kind of like, these are drier here. See, these are still a little wet, so I'll start up in here first. These, it looks like I'm using kind of a darker brownish green color, so if I pick up some of my burnt umber here, I'm just going to mix it right there in that green pile that I've been using. And that's probably a good tone right in there. So I'll do this to get, these I've done, I'm positive, with this very brush here. If you want them to be a little more delicate, you could use a little finer tipped brush. My little trick for these is when I place this in, I'm going to touch with my brush and then kind of flick up with my wrist. And so I'm going to place these randomly. So some will be kind of closer together, some will be poking out. And I just want to kind of a nice balance. I try not to overfill them too much so they don't get too fussy. So with a little brush like this, the thing is you're going to have to, you know, pick up new color because it's just very thin. It's not going to hold a lot. Okay, I'm going to come on around this way. if you're using a smaller brush, that can be a little bit easier sometimes so it doesn't get away from you. Okay, I'm going to work on this part next. I can show you what a bigger brush, and it all comes back to how much pressure you're putting on the brush. So this, like here, I've just blotted out my brush. I'm going to shape it back to a point and just pick up on the very tip. I don't want a really wet brush if I'm trying to do little details like this. And so here, same thing, I'm just going to barely touch and flick with the wrist. Get a little more intensity in my color. So place, flick, flick. So you can see if you've got, you know, decent brush, you can still get some nice little fine details with it. Okay. I'm a little drier in here, so this part here I'll work on that. These are kind of fun. Once you get your rhythm and your pressure, you know, I try not to, I don't want to do them all the same size necessarily. I don't want to do them all in the same quite direction. They're not going to be perfectly spaced when so if I kind of keep them slightly on random but still in a a good spacing pattern, maybe that's a good thing to say there. Bring a couple here so we kind of get seeing off of that edge there. And if you have any you want to come back over and strengthen up, you can. And we'll come and give those flowers one more little shot there. Again, I'll bring a little more intensity into that color. And then here's where I want to think about, like, where those darker ones, and bring those more underneath the bottom. And see, just when we put that darker color in without being too fussy, it really gives them a little more like dimension to them. Super cute little succulent. Like I said, if you want to do this again, it's always, you learn a lot when you paint something over and over again, and then you can get a little more complicated and add more segments to this. But at least for now, we've gone through and we've done a good practice. And come back tomorrow and I'm going to have a different cactus for you, and then yet another one on Wednesday. So thanks for watching. Be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.